Hi, welcome to the latest installment in the YouTube series on Irish records and their relationship with my website, Irish Ancestors at johngrennan.com. Today, I'm going to be talking about Irish wills and how you can use them to help find your ancestors, how you can get access to them and so on, and how the site handles them. So let's go straight to the site and get stuck in. Right, here we are at the homepage. First of all, I'm just going to show you, I'm going to use this as a navigation aid for myself, the section on wills in the free browse area of the website. This is an exact transcript, a full transcript with some extra illustrations, in fact, of the chapter on wills from my book, Tracing Your Irish Ancestors, the 2019 edition, 5th edition. So one of the points made at the outset is that wills are very obviously a prime source of family information. They record the name of the person who made the will. More often than not, they record extended families. They often, sometimes, very often embody family feuds and rows, and people not mentioned, people left out can be just as significant as people included. So you get the full richness of the family history in a will. Irish wills are peculiar. That's no surprise. They're peculiar for a number of reasons. First of all, the change in administration. There's a watershed point, a year that you should keep in mind at all times if you're trying to track down an Irish will, and that's 1858. So right up to 1857, the Church of Ireland, the Anglican Church, the state church, was responsible for administering wills. And it did it on the basis of its own subdivisions, the diocese, and we'll say something more about that in a few minutes. From 1858 on, the state took over administration, and that produced significantly more comprehensive and more accessible extracts and full wills, which are also much easier to track down online than the pre-1858 ones. So that's the first peculiarity. The second peculiarity, of course, is that all of the wills, these were public records, okay? These are records of property transactions. They were public records. Where were they? They were in the Public Record Office. And what did we do with them? We blew them all up in 1922. So one of the upshots of that is that though they're very useful, the bits and pieces that survive, the bits and pieces that have been dug up and put together and reassembled since, make researching Irish wills very complicated. The sources are very fragmented. It's very difficult to get a complete overview and to be sure that you haven't missed something. And that's one of the things I try to do on the site. Let's go back and have a look again just at that division I was talking about. Before 1857, well, up to 1857 in effect, the Church of Ireland was the administering body. And the local diocese had a court called a consistorial court. And it dealt with not just wills, but also intestacies, where people left property but didn't leave a will, and it had to be distributed in some shape or form according to the laws of probate. And those laws were implemented by the consistorial courts in the local Church of Ireland diocese. Okay, the question then is what happened to wills or intestacies where there was property in more than one diocese. And the rule was where there was property worth more than £5 in two dioceses, £5 in each diocese or more, the governing body was the prerogative court in Armagh, which was the Archbishop of Armagh was the head of the church in Ireland, so that his court there dealt with these more significant wills. And that's it. It's quite important to keep that in mind, because these tend to deal with more property. They tend to deal with the upper echelons of society, and they have also, at least up before 1800, all of the family information in them has been extracted and is relatively easily available. So it's worth keeping those two things in mind. One thing, though, the consistorial courts were a bit hit and miss about keeping records. There aren't nearly as many as they should be, even before 1922. Not nearly as many as they should be survived. So you're talking about patchiness even before the great the great explosion of 1922. Okay, after 1857, from 1858 on, the Probate Act did away with the authority of the Church of Ireland, and it still it created the equivalent of the diocese, but bigger ones, 11 district registries. So a registry in Tuam, Dublin, Belfast, Mullingar, Galway. So centered on large provincial towns and cities. They did more or less the work that the diocesan courts had done, except they did it better. And one of the things that was instituted immediately from 1858 is this calendaring system. Calendar meaning a detailed abstract of the original document. So let me show you an example. This is from the calendar of wills and administration. So again, wills and intestacies for 1871. They're purely alphabetical. There's a volume for each year from 1858 right on. So letters of administration of the personal estate of Daniel Horgan, late of Great George's Street, Cork, builder deceased. So it's an administration. It's not a will. It's an intestacy. Okay, the administration was granted to Michael Joseph Horgan, solicitor, the nephew, for the benefit of Catherine Horgan, widow John Horgan, the Reverend David Horgan, Ellen Gilman, Mary Daly, and Margaret Horgan. You have a skeleton family tree there, or at least good prima facie evidence of a skeleton family tree. Possible marriage between Gilman and Ellen Horgan, and a Daly and Mary Horgan. So okay, and you know that the Reverend David Horgan was the priest in the family. Michael Joseph Horgan was a solicitor. There'll be occupational records for him. So you have all sorts of threads thrown up by this that can get you further into the family. And those exist for every will that was probated from 1858 on. And every will and every intestacy. And it's important to keep that word probated in mind. Sometimes people died in the early 1850s and the will wasn't probated for 3 or 4 years. So if somebody died in 1854, they might very well have had a will probated after 1857. And if they have, there will be at the very least this detailed abstract. Okay, not all of them are as informative as that. They get less informative as the years go by, but they're there, and that's something to cheer about. The local district registries also did something wonderful. They made full transcripts of all the wills and intestacies that they granted, that they dealt with, before sending the originals to Dublin, to the Public Record Office, because they were public records. They were records of public property transactions, where we blew them up. I just can't help saying that over and over again. Anyway, they made full transcripts of every will and every intestacy that they dealt with. So let me show you what one of those looked like. This is from Waterford District Registry. It's a grant of probate from the 20th of January 1892. So again, not a will. It is a will, actually. No, I beg your pardon. It's a probate, not an administration. So James Mernon of number 16 Patrick Street in the county of the city of Waterford, baker and confectioner, do hereby make my last will and testament. Okay, you can see this is a word by word exact transcript of an original will. And it's worth also just pointing out, this man was a baker and confectioner. So he was a dealer, a merchant. He was in business. He would not have been rich by any manner of means. So as the years went by, as property rights became more diffuse and spread through the lower reaches of society, more and more people were caught up in the probate net. And so it's a, even if you think your ancestors weren't properties, if they were small farmers, or they may very well have left wills, or if they didn't, maybe the priest in their family left a will. So you always have to think a little bit sideways about these things. Okay, that's a basic guide to how the authority was set up. One of the problems about the post 1857 regime is that the principal registry, which took the place of the old prerogative court, was in Dublin, and its records were in the public record office and didn't survive. So there was very little for the Dublin area and for the most significant wills, and that can be a problem. Bits and pieces did survive, and I'll come to that in a second. Okay, this is something that I mentioned earlier, that how fragmented will research, testamentary research can be. And there are all sorts of things that have, first of all, the National Archives, the successor of the Public Record Office, has been collecting wills from solicitors' offices, from genealogists' transcripts, from the Office of Charitable Donations and Bequests, and so on, and indexing those. And their card index in the reading room is the main source of access to it. The reading room currently is closed due to the pandemic, but there is a microfilm copy made in the early 1960s, I think, by the Mormons, and that's available online via the Mormon website, familysearch.org. You should keep in mind that it omits anything that was added in the last 25, 30 years or so, but still it's there. And again, anything that's there, we can only be thankful for. There are also other bits and pieces. You can read through this yourself. Things that would be afterthoughts if the full original connection had survived. So those are there. Again, this is part of the chapter from Tracing Your Irish Ancestors. One of the things I'm trying to do is provide a general checklist. One of my motivations in writing the book in the first place was this haunting feeling when I'm doing research that there's something I'm missing, there's something I'm not looking at. So make a checklist for yourself, and that's what this is. First of all, there's a checklist for pre-1858 ones, which include things like the National Archives card room, card index rather, in the reading room, surviving will and grant books. Again, these would be things that were out in the reading room in the Public Record Office in 1922 and survived purely by accident because somebody was looking at the volume A to W for prerogative wills, 1706 to 1708. Then abstracts and transcripts, and you can see there are loads and loads and loads and loads of them. There are even some collections that deal with surnames. And then by diocese, so this is pre-1858. Okay, and then you have the indexes, which were in the reading room again, and are all published. Most of them are on Find My Past. And then you have the post-1857. The yearly calendars I've mentioned already. They're almost all online. The best guide to the will calendars is on this website, the Council of Irish Genealogical Organizations, this guide to wills and calendars, and they have links to the later calendars coming up to 1982 on the National Archives website. Believe me, it's easier to find them via here than it is on the website, on the National Archives website. And then all of the district registry will books that have survived, and it says online to 1900. These are all in the National Archives website, genealogy.nationalarchives.ie. And for the district registry will books for Armagh, Belfast, and Londonderry, they're online at the Public Record Office in Northern Ireland website via the will calendar search. So in other words, for all wills probated before 1900 outside Dublin, there is a full transcript of the will available online somewhere. And what this does is try and give you an overview of it. That's the book online. How do I handle these things via the local? Let's pick a civil parish, and I'll show you what this does. This does, the aim is to, so this is the civil parish of Devonish in County Fermanagh. There you are, coming up to the shores of Loch Earn. What I'm trying to do with this is to give a detailed checklist relating to this area. So some of them will be general, okay? So here you have the National Archives of Ireland card index that I've mentioned already, the pre-1858 wills index in the Prony reading room, and you get various general ones. And then when you come down, it's ordered by date. So it starts off in 1499. And as we come up later and later, so there are bits of the prerogative will book, the Clogher consistorial, that would be the diocese covering Devonish, okay, and that's online. That's online there at the National Archives genealogy website. And as we come down closer, you can see there are more and more. And here you have the Cavan District Registry Will Book, which again is online. The will register is 1858 to 1900. Armagh, so part of Devonish would have been in Cavan District Registry, and part of it would have been in Armagh. And that's one of the things about Prony's collection. The district registries of Armagh, Londonderry, and Belfast. Well, Belfast covered areas that's entirely in Northern Ireland, but Londonderry and Armagh covered areas that are outside Northern Ireland now. So you need to keep that in mind. You're dealing with a past where things are very different to the way at the moment. And here you have the guide to the calendars of wills and ministrations. Here you have a list of what survived from principal registry. So 1874, G to N. Again, these bits of wills, bits of indexes that survived because they were in the reading room, because they weren't back in the record treasury that we blew up in 1922. Okay, I apologize for having said blown up 1922 so many times, but it's pretty unavoidable when you're talking about a subject like this. I hope I've given you a sense of an overview of how you can use wills, of why it can be so complex, and to some extent of the wealth of information that is there if you're lucky enough to be able to track one down. And more than any other record source, this is one where you need luck and tenacity. I wish you both. Thank you.